I've been a part of the same church community for 40 years, and I've been involved in leadership, so I'm not critiquing the church from the outside. I'm evaluating myself and what we've done from the inside. I think we've held up on Sunday mornings and given us examples of what is significant and meaningful in terms of Christian ministry and mission. And almost none of it has to do with the work that most people in the church do in their ordinary Monday to Friday lives. What gets held up are things which are great things. Perhaps it's the children's ministry or the family ministry, student and family ministry of the church, or there's a mission trip. In our case, we send people to Honduras once a year, and we send people to Haiti. All these kind of mission opportunities, which are wonderful, and they do great work that's important. But I had this conversation with my pastor one time. I said, if I just listen, if I try to pretend to be somebody coming in from the outside listening, what would I conclude about what is actual meaningful ministry and mission? It's the programs of the church, the ministry programs of the church, and the missions that we support. And yet we don't talk at all about the vocation that people are called to in their ordinary everyday work. And I think that's deeply problematic. And in fact, if anything, we give energy and focus to recruiting people out of their everyday work to sign people up for what the church is engaged in. And these are good things. And I think that's part of the challenge, is because they are good things. It's a bit like arguing against motherhood and apple pie at that point, right? When I first became a Christian, I was really enthused about the gospel and being involved in the church. I was very grateful for being part of a community of people who loved me and cared about me. So I signed up for everything imaginable. There was a long list of things to do. Right? As most churches, there's a list. The help wanted ads are a lot longer than the list of people who are willing to do things. So I signed up for everything imaginable. And what was interesting was I got lots of positive feedback. People said, great, love to have you involved. But I noticed at one point that their affirmation of my work in the sense of engaging in the local church and its ministry and mission was in a different category than the work that I did at work. Almost nobody affirmed the other. And it's almost like, and that's the problem, because it basically sends, I think, a really problematic message to people, because it's basically saying that what most people do most of the time doesn't seem to matter to God. What matters is what takes place on Sundays in terms of the ministry and mission of the church. And I think that's really an issue, because that means that the church is essentially saying what you do with the rest of your life really doesn't matter. And I think that is inconsistent with what I read in the scriptures, that Jesus, in fact, is Lord of all of life. And so what we've done is recruited and spent a lot of energy recruiting people to focus on one slice of life and ignored a vast swatch of life. And I think that's what I'm concerned about in terms of encouraging people to focus and to get the church to focus on how to enable people to do that. So some practical suggestions on that score is, I think first of all, is simply to acknowledge and affirm that the rest of life is in fact the venue where God is at work, working out his kingdom. And you can do it in small, simple ways. We've, at our church, actually started the last couple of years having a commissioning service for all the people of God in the congregation. So you're probably, many of you who are part of churches know that you've had probably dedication or commissioning services for people who go on mission trips. Well, we said, if that's all we do, that says mission is about something that a few people do a few days a week out of the year. So what we decided to do was say, no, let's have a commissioning service for the whole people of God. Let's have everybody stand up. Let's have the pastor commission them to the various works and vocations in which they find themselves, and to bless them in that way. And I think it's remarkable what that simple symbolic act does for people, to say, you know what, this is really, really important. I think the second thing that the church can do is to recover the biblical story of how all of life matters. I think we've told a gospel that's fairly spiritualized, that is about saving souls and getting people to heaven. And we've sort of ignored the rest of life. And I think if we faithfully look at and read and study and teach the scriptures from Genesis to Revelation, we'll find that all of life matters to God. And I think the church has done a disservice by focusing on just the spiritual dimension. Now, the spiritual dimension of life, the interior life, is really important, but it is not all of life. And I think part of the church's challenge in its educational ministry is to see all of life and to tell the story about all of life. And I think the third thing that the church can do is to create organizational structures to support people who are in the various vocations that they find themselves in. A simple example of that might be just to start a small group in a church that is focused on people in business or teachers or medical professionals, whatever, or just anybody who's just doing work outside of the church's specific ministries, and provide a support group and talk about what is it that you're struggling with in terms of living this faith out. And there's some great resources available. A couple good books I would recommend to folks who are starting such a group. One is Tim Keller's book called Every Good Endeavor, which has just been published. And the other book is Jeff Van Duzer's book, Why Business Matters to God. I think both books give you sort of an introduction in how to think about living out your vocation in all of life.